There are some wounds that time cannot heal, some choices that echo through every prayer and sleepless night. Sister Marianne had spent 30 years trying to forget the baby girl she gave up when she took her vows at 19. The convent had become her refuge, a place where routine and service could quiet the ache in her heart. Then came the day when a group of second graders visited on a school tour. Among the chattering children was one quiet girl with bright eyes who stayed close to Sister Marianne's side. She asked thoughtful questions and listened carefully to every answer. As the tour ended, the little girl looked up and whispered, "I'll be like you when I grow up." Something in her smile, in the way she tilted her head, felt achingly familiar. Sister Marianne's breath caught in her throat as she studied the child's face. Could this precious girl be the daughter she thought she'd lost forever? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning bell at St. Agnes Convent rang at 5:30, just as it had for the past 120 years. Sister Marianne's eyes opened before the final chime faded, her internal clock as precise as the ancient timepiece that governed their days. At 59, she moved through her morning routine with the practiced grace of 3 decades, washing at the small basin in her cell, donning the familiar brown habit, pinning her veil with hands that no longer trembled as they once had. Her room was sparse, as befitted her vows of poverty: a narrow bed, a wooden chair, a small desk where her worn prayer book lay open to the psalm she'd been contemplating before sleep. The pages fell naturally to passages about forgiveness, about God's mercy toward those who had made difficult choices. The leather binding was soft from handling, marked with what might have been tear stains on certain verses about sacrifice and redemption. Sister Marianne had kept few personal belongings when she'd taken her final vows 30 years ago. Hidden beneath her prayer book, wrapped in a piece of faded blue cloth, lay a single document she'd never quite found the courage to destroy, a birth certificate bearing a date that haunted her dreams. March 15th, 1994. The day her daughter was born, the day she'd held a perfect tiny life in her arms for exactly 4 hours before signing papers that would give that child to another family. She was 19 then, unmarried, with no family support and no way to provide for a baby. The sisters at St. Agnes had taken her in during her pregnancy, offering shelter and counseling. Mother Superior Catherine, now long past, had been gentle but firm about the realities facing a young single mother in 1994. "You have two paths, child," she'd said in her Irish accent. "You can struggle alone and likely watch that baby suffer for your pride, or you can give her the chance at a real family, a real life. Sometimes love means letting go." The decision had nearly broken her, but holding her daughter, she'd named her Hope. Though the name would never appear on any official documents, Sister Marianne had whispered promises about finding her way back to God, about making her sacrifice mean something. When the adoption papers were signed and the baby placed in the arms of a family who'd waited years for this moment, Sister Marianne felt her heart crack like winter ice. The convent had become her sanctuary. The routine, the prayers, the service to others, it had gradually built a protective wall around the raw wound of her loss. She'd thrown herself into her duties with the fervor of someone seeking redemption, teaching catechism to local children, tending the convent garden where tomatoes and herbs grew in neat rows, caring for elderly sisters who'd grown frail in their service to God. Mother Superior Agnes, who'd taken over leadership 15 years ago, often remarked that Sister Marianne had a special gift with children. They seemed drawn to her patient manner, her gentle voice, the way she listened to their concerns as if they were the most important things in the world. What Mother Superior didn't know was that every child who passed through their doors reminded Sister Marianne of the daughter she'd never raised, the bedtime stories she'd never read, the scraped knees she'd never kissed better. The convent itself was a rambling stone building that had served the community since 1903. High-ceilinged corridors echoed with the soft pad of sandaled feet on worn wooden floors. Stained glass windows, cast-colored patterns that shifted with the sun's movement, painting the walls in blues and golds and deep crimsons that reminded the sisters of heaven's promised beauty. The chapel, with its hand-carved altar and simple wooden pews, had witnessed thousands of prayers, confessions, and moments of spiritual breakthrough. Sister Marianne's favorite place was the library, where leather-bound volumes of theology and history lined the shelves alongside more practical books about gardening and education. She'd spent countless hours here over the years, seeking answers to questions she couldn't voice aloud. Questions about whether God forgave mothers who gave away their children, whether love could exist across impossible distances, whether some mistakes were too profound for redemption. On this particular morning, the morning that would change everything, Sister Marianne moved through her duties with the same quiet efficiency that marked all her days. Morning prayers with the community of 12 sisters, ranging in age from 32 to 87. Breakfast in the refectory, where conversation was limited but warm smiles were plentiful. Her assignment to prepare the reception hall for the school tour, scheduled for 10 o'clock. The tours were monthly events, bringing local second and third graders to learn about the convent's history and the sisters' way of life. Children always filled the space with energy that was both challenging and delightful. They asked endless questions. Why do you dress like that? Do you watch television? Are you allowed to eat candy? Their innocence and curiosity never failed to touch something deep in Sister Marianne's heart. She arranged folding chairs in a semicircle, checked that the small display of historical artifacts was properly labeled, and made sure the reception hall's windows were open to let in the spring air. May had arrived with unusual warmth, and the apple trees in the convent orchard were heavy with white blossoms that filled the breeze with sweetness. At precisely 10 o'clock, she heard the school bus rumbling up the gravel drive. Through the window, she watched 23 second graders tumble out in a cascade of bright backpacks and chattering voices. Mrs. Patterson, their teacher, followed with the patient expression of someone accustomed to herding energetic 7-year-olds. Sister Marianne had given dozens of these tours over the years. She knew how to capture young attention, how to explain complex ideas in simple terms, how to make the sisters' way of life seem not strange, but special. She talked about their daily prayers, their work in the community, their commitment to helping others. The children usually listened politely, asked a few questions, then moved on to the next part of their tour. But this day was different. From the moment the children filed into the reception hall, one little girl caught Sister Marianne's attention. She was smaller than most of her classmates, with dark skin and expressive brown eyes that seemed to take in everything. While other children fidgeted or whispered to friends, this girl sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching Sister Marianne with an intensity that was both flattering and slightly unnerving. When Sister Marianne asked if anyone had questions, the little girl's hand shot up immediately. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked in a clear, thoughtful voice. The question took Sister Marianne by surprise. Most children asked about rules or restrictions, not about emotions. "Sometimes," she answered honestly, "but we have each other, and we have our faith. That helps us not feel alone." The girl nodded solemnly, as if this answer made perfect sense to her. As the tour continued through the chapel and garden, Sister Marianne noticed the child staying close to her side, while other children ran ahead to see the next interesting thing. This little girl walked at Sister Marianne's pace, listening to every word, asking occasional questions that showed remarkable maturity. "Why did you decide to become a nun?" she asked as they paused beside the vegetable garden. Sister Marianne considered her answer carefully. "I wanted to serve God and help people. Sometimes we make choices that change our whole lives, and this was one of those choices for me." The child tilted her head, a gesture so familiar it made Sister Marianne's breath catch. "Was it hard to decide?" "Yes," Sister Marianne said softly, "very hard. But sometimes the hardest choices are the ones that help us become who we're meant to be." As the tour wound down and the children prepared to board their bus, the little girl approached Sister Marianne one final time. She looked up with those serious brown eyes and whispered the words that would shatter 30 years of carefully constructed peace. "I'll be like you when I grow up." Something in her smile, in the way she tilted her head, in the cadence of her voice, struck Sister Marianne like a physical blow. The child's features seemed achingly familiar, the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, even the way she stood with one hip slightly cocked. These were details Sister Marianne had carried in her memory for 30 years, wondering how her daughter might look, how she might sound, what kind of person she might become. As the school bus pulled away with the child's face pressed to the window, waving goodbye, Sister Marianne stood frozen on the convent steps. Her heart pounded so hard she feared it might burst. 30 years of suppressed longing, of wondering, of praying for just one glimpse of her daughter came crashing down on her in a single moment. Could it be possible? Could this remarkable, thoughtful child be the baby she'd held so briefly and loved so completely? The dates seemed right. The child appeared to be about 8, which would match the timing, but surely it was just wishful thinking, the desperate hope of a woman who'd never stopped mourning her loss. Sister Marianne remained on the steps long after the bus disappeared, her hand pressed to her chest, as if she could somehow slow her racing heart. In the distance, the convent bell chimed the hour, calling her back to her duties, to the life she'd built from the ashes of her sacrifice. But something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in 30 years, the careful walls she'd built around her grief had developed cracks. And through those cracks, a dangerous possibility was beginning to take root, the chance that her greatest loss might not have been permanent after all. Sister Marianne spent the next 3 days in a state of barely controlled agitation. During morning prayers, her mind wandered to brown eyes and a tilted head. While tending the garden, she found herself pulling weeds with unnecessary force, as if physical labor could uproot the thoughts that had taken hold in her mind. Even her sleep was fitful, filled with dreams of babies and school buses, and a voice whispering, "I'll be like you when I grow up." On Thursday morning, she made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week earlier. After breakfast, instead of going to her assigned duties in the kitchen, she walked to Mother Superior Agnes's office and knocked on the heavy wooden door. "Come in, Sister Marianne," came the familiar voice from within. Mother Superior Agnes was a woman of 65, with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd led the community at St. Agnes for 15 years, with a combination of firmness and compassion that reminded Sister Marianne of the mother she'd never really known. The office itself reflected Agnes's practical nature. A simple desk, 2 wooden chairs, shelves lined with administrative files and theological texts, and a single window that looked out over the convent's apple orchard. "You seem troubled, my dear," Mother Superior said, setting down her pen and folding her hands. "Please sit." Sister Marianne took the chair across from the desk, her own hands trembling slightly as she tried to find words for what she needed to ask. "Mother Superior, I was wondering about the school tour on Monday. The children from Riverside Elementary." "Yes, it went very well, I thought. The children were well behaved, and you handled the presentation beautifully as always." "There was one child," Sister Marianne began, then stopped. How could she explain the recognition that had struck her like lightning? How could she voice suspicions that might be nothing more than the desperate imaginings of a woman who'd never stopped grieving? I was wondering if you might know how I could get information about the students. Their names, perhaps. Mother Superior's eyebrows rose slightly. That's an unusual request, Sister. Is there a particular reason you need this information? Sister Marianne felt heat rise in her cheeks. I thought I might write a thank you note to their teacher. The children were so engaging, and I wanted to express our appreciation properly. It wasn't entirely a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Mother Superior studied her for a long moment, and Sister Marianne had the uncomfortable feeling that her deception was transparent. I'll contact Mrs. Patterson and let her know how pleased we were with the visit, Mother Superior said diplomatically. If there's anything specific you'd like me to convey, please let me know. Dismissed but not satisfied, Sister Marianne returned to her duties with a heavy heart. That afternoon, during her free period, she walked to the convent's small administrative office where Sister Catherine, not to be confused with the former Mother Superior, handled correspondence and record-keeping. Catherine was in her 40s, efficient and kind, with a memory for details that made her invaluable to the community. Sister Catherine, Marianne began carefully, I was wondering about the school tour we had this week. Do you happen to keep records of which schools visit us? Of course, Catherine replied, pulling out a thick folder. We maintain records for insurance purposes and also to track our community outreach efforts. Riverside Elementary has been bringing groups here for about 5 years now. Sister Marianne's pulse quickened. 5 years would mean the child had likely been in kindergarten the first time she'd visited the convent. Had they met before without Sister Marianne noticing? Had there been other opportunities for recognition that she'd somehow missed? The children seemed particularly bright this year, Sister Marianne said, trying to keep her voice casual. Very engaged with the material. Mrs. Patterson always brings good groups. She teaches 2nd grade, so the children are usually 7 or 8 years old enough to understand what we're telling them, but young enough to still be curious about everything. 7 or 8. The age fit perfectly with what Sister Marianne had calculated in her sleepless nights. Her daughter would be 8 years old now, born in March. If this child from the tour was indeed her daughter, she would have been placed with a family somewhere in the local area. The adoption agency had promised to keep the placement within a reasonable distance, though they'd been clear that no contact would be possible. I don't suppose you remember any specific students from Monday's visit? Sister Marianne asked, knowing she was pushing the boundaries of casual inquiry. Sister Catherine looked up from her files, a curious expression on her face. That's quite specific, Sister Marianne. Is there something I should know about? The directness of the question caught Sister Marianne off guard. She felt her carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of 30 years of suppressed longing. There was a little girl, she said quietly. Dark hair, brown eyes, very thoughtful. She reminded me of someone. Ah, Sister Catherine said, her expression softening with understanding. Sometimes the children do remind us of family members or friends from long ago. It's natural to make those connections. Sister Marianne nodded, grateful that Catherine had provided an explanation that didn't require her to reveal the truth. But Catherine wasn't finished. If you're interested in following up with any of the students, I could probably get you the class roster from Mrs. Patterson. We sometimes send thank you notes or small gifts to classes that visit us. The offer was exactly what Sister Marianne had hoped for, but now that it was within reach, she felt paralyzed by the implications. Getting the child's name would make this real in a way that mere speculation couldn't. It would cross a line she'd been careful not to approach for 30 years. I'll think about it, she said finally. But thinking was all she could do for the rest of that day and into the evening. During night prayers, she found herself silently bargaining with God. If this child was her daughter, What was she supposed to do with that knowledge? The girl clearly had a loving family, was thriving in school, seemed happy and secure. What right did Sister Marianne have to disrupt that peace with revelations about her true parentage? On the other hand, didn't she have some right to know? Didn't 30 years of wondering, of grief, of daily prayers for a daughter she'd never seen again earn her the simple knowledge of whether that daughter was alive and well? Friday morning brought a resolution of sorts. During breakfast, Sister Catherine approached her table with a folded piece of paper. "I contacted Mrs. Patterson yesterday afternoon," she said quietly. "She was delighted to hear how much we enjoyed the visit, and she sent along the class roster. She said if any of the sisters wanted to send notes to specific students who showed particular interest, the children would be thrilled." Sister Marianne took the paper with hands that trembled slightly. "Thank you, Sister Catherine. That was very thoughtful of both of you." She waited until she was alone in her cell to unfold the paper. 23 names were listed in neat rows, sorted alphabetically by last name. Her eyes scanned the list quickly, looking for something that would leap out at her, some sign of recognition or connection, and there it was, halfway down the list, Sarah Michelle Thompson. Sarah, the name hit her like a physical blow. Not Hope, the name she'd whispered to her newborn daughter, but Sarah, a beautiful, strong name that somehow felt exactly right for the thoughtful child who'd stayed by her side during the tour. Sarah Michelle Thompson, 8 years old, according to the notation beside her name. Born March 18th, 1994. March 18th, 3 days after the date on the birth certificate hidden beneath her prayer book. Sister Marianne sank onto her narrow bed, the paper clutched in her shaking hands. It could be a coincidence. March was a common month for births, and dates could be recorded differently depending on when the adoption was finalized. But the combination of the name, the age, the date, and most importantly, the inexplicable recognition she'd felt when, looking into those brown eyes, it all pointed to an impossible, wonderful, terrifying truth. Sarah Thompson might be her daughter Hope, the child she'd held for 4 precious hours before signing papers that would separate them forever. The question now was what, if anything, she was going to do about it. The hospital bracelet had been tucked away for so long that Sister Marianne had almost forgotten its exact location. That Friday evening, after evening prayers, and when the other sisters had retired to their cells, she moved her narrow bed away from the wall and pried up the loose floorboard she'd discovered years ago. Beneath it, wrapped in an old prayer shawl, was a small wooden box that contained the few material reminders of her life before taking vows. Her fingers trembled as she lifted out the plastic bracelet, its white surface yellowed with age, but still legible. Baby Girl Reeves, March 15, 1994, 3:47 a.m., 6 lbs, 2 Oz. The bracelet they'd placed on her wrist in the maternity ward, identifying her as the mother of a perfect little girl who'd entered the world with a lusty cry and eyes that seemed to look directly into Sister Marianne's soul. 3 days before, Sarah Thompson's recorded birth date, close enough to account for paperwork delays or deliberate alterations made during the adoption process. Sister Marianne held the bracelet up to the lamp beside her bed, studying the faded numbers as if they might reveal more secrets. She hadn't looked at this bracelet in over a decade. The physical pain of touching it, of remembering those 4 hours when she'd believed she might somehow find a way to keep her baby, had been too much to bear in her earlier years at the convent. But tonight, with Sarah's name burning in her, memory and the possibility of answers finally within reach, she traced the edges of the plastic with something approaching reverence. The next morning, Sister Marianne made a decision that would have shocked her younger self. Instead of attending the usual Saturday morning community service project, she approached Mother Superior Agnes with a request for a personal day. "I need to run an errand in town," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Some personal business. I've been putting off too long. Mother Superior Agnes studied her with those penetrating grey eyes. You seem quite unsettled lately, Sister Marianne. Is everything all right? I'm working through some old concerns, Sister Marianne replied, which was truthful if incomplete. I think taking care of this matter will help me find some peace. Of course. Take whatever time you need. The bus ride into downtown took 45 minutes, giving Sister Marianne plenty of time to second-guess her plan. She hadn't been to the offices of Catholic Family Services in over 15 years, and that visit had been purely professional, helping another young woman navigate the same impossible choices Sister Marianne had faced at 19. But she remembered the location, remembered the kind social worker who'd held her hand while she signed the papers that changed her life forever. The building looked smaller than she remembered, a modest brick structure squeezed between a law office and a used bookstore. The lobby was exactly as she'd left it. Worn carpet, uncomfortable chairs, motivational posters on the walls about family and hope and new beginnings. The receptionist, a young woman who looked barely older than Sister Marianne had been when she'd first walked through these doors, looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" Sister Marianne took a deep breath. "I'm looking for information about an adoption that was arranged through this agency in 1994. I was wondering if there might be someone who could help me." "Are you looking to make contact with family members?" "We have procedures for that, but they can take some time." "No," Sister Marianne said quickly. "Nothing like that. I just need some basic information verified, birth dates, that sort of thing." The receptionist's expression became more cautious. "I'll need to get you connected with one of our social workers. Can I ask what your relationship is to the adoption case?" Sister Marianne felt her cheeks burning. "I'm the birth mother." 20 minutes later, she found herself sitting across from Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair. Mrs. Rodriguez had reviewed Sister Marianne's file. Apparently their records went back much further than she'd hoped, and was looking at her with a mixture of professional concern and human curiosity. "Sister Marianne," she began gently, "I have to ask why you're seeking this information now, after so many years. Has something happened that's prompted this inquiry?" "I may have encountered my daughter," Sister Marianne said, the words feeling strange and dangerous in her mouth. "Not deliberately. She was part of a school group that visited our convent. I recognize something in her, and I just need to know if it's possible." Mrs. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "I understand. These situations are more common than you might think. The desire to know what happened to a child you placed for adoption never really goes away, does it?" "Never," Sister Marianne confirmed quietly. "I can tell you some general information without violating confidentiality," Mrs. Rodriguez said, opening the file on her desk. "Your daughter was placed with a family in this area, a couple who had been trying to conceive for several years. They were selected partly because they lived locally, as you'd requested. The adoption was finalized when she was 6 months old." Sister Marianne's heart clenched at the word daughter. After 30 years of thinking about her child as the baby or hope in her most private moments, hearing someone else acknowledge her reality felt both validating and terrifying. "The family changed her legal birth date slightly," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "This is sometimes done to protect the privacy of all parties involved. Instead of March 15th, her official birthday is listed as March 18th. The confirmation hit Sister Marianne like a physical blow. Sarah Thompson's birth date matched exactly with what this woman was telling her. The pieces were falling into place with a precision that left no room for doubt. "Can you tell me anything else? About her family? About how she's doing?" Mrs. Rodriguez hesitated. "I can tell you that the family has maintained contact with us. Over the years, They've sent annual letters and photos, which is fairly common in cases where birth parents express interest in general updates. They seem to be loving, devoted parents, and your daughter appears to be thriving. Photos? Sister Marianne whispered. Yes, I have several here in the file. Mrs. Rodriguez turned the folder so Sister Marianne could see the contents. The most recent one was sent about 6 months ago. Sister Marianne found herself looking at a snapshot of Sarah Thompson, unmistakably the same child who'd toured the convent, but captured in a different setting. She was standing between a white woman with blonde hair and a tall man with dark hair and a warm smile. All three were grinning at the camera, clearly comfortable and happy together. Sarah was wearing a soccer uniform and holding a small trophy. She plays soccer, Sister Marianne said softly, touching the edge of the photo. According to the letter her parents sent with this picture, she's quite athletic, also an excellent student, very curious about the world around her. They mentioned that she's been asking a lot of questions about religion lately, which they found interesting since they're not particularly religious themselves. Sister Marianne felt tears welling in her eyes. The child she'd wondered about for 30 years was real, was thriving, was asking questions about faith that might somehow be connected to the spiritual longing Sister Marianne had hoped to pass on to her daughter. There's one more thing, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. If you're interested, there are legal processes in place for birth parents who want to establish contact. It requires the consent of all parties, including your daughter, when she reaches 18, but it's possible. Sister Marianne nodded, though she felt overwhelmed by the possibilities and complications that stretched ahead. I need to think about this, about what's best for everyone involved. As she rode the bus back to the convent, clutching a business card with Mrs. Rodriguez's contact information, Sister Marianne stared out the window at the familiar landscape and tried to process what she'd learned. Sarah Thompson was her daughter Hope. The child was loved, successful, happy, and somewhere in her 8-year-old heart, she was asking questions about God and faith that had led her to whisper, "I'll be like you when I grow up," to the mother she'd never known she was meeting. The weight of that knowledge settled over Sister Marianne like a blessing and a burden she wasn't sure she was strong enough to carry. The lullaby had come to Sister Marianne in those sleepless hours after giving birth, when her arms ached from their emptiness and her breasts still carried milk for a baby who would never nurse. She'd hummed it first, then whispered the words she composed in her hospital bed during those final hours before signing the adoption papers. Later, at the convent, she'd written it down on a piece of sheet music paper, a simple melody with words about love that transcends distance and a mother's prayers that follow a child wherever she goes. She'd hidden the sheet music with the hospital bracelet and birth certificate, never imagining she'd hear those words again. But Tuesday evening, as she worked in the convent garden pulling weeds from the tomato beds, she heard it, soft and sweet, carried on the evening breeze. Sleep now, little angel, rest your weary head, dream of all tomorrow's joys, in your cozy bed. Though I cannot hold you, though we are apart, know that you are loved, my dear, deep within my heart. Sister Marianne's hands stilled in the soil. The melody was exactly as she'd composed it 30 years ago, though the voice singing it was higher, younger, more innocent than her own had been. She looked up to see Sarah Thompson standing at the garden gate, her small hands wrapped around the iron bars as she sang to herself. "Sarah?" Sister Marianne called softly, not wanting to startle the child. The little girl looked up with a bright smile. "Hi, Sister Marianne. My mum's in the church talking to Mother Superior about something. She said I could wait outside, so I've been looking at your garden. It's really pretty." Sister Marianne stood slowly, brushing soil from her hands while her mind reeled. How did Sarah know that lullaby? Where could she possibly have learned it? "That's a lovely song you were singing. Where did you hear it?" Sarah tilted her head, that familiar gesture that never failed to catch Sister Marianne's breath. I don't really remember. I think I've always known it. Sometimes when I can't sleep, I sing it to myself, and it helps me feel better. Do you know it? I might, Sister Marianne said carefully. Would you like to come into the garden? I could show you what we're growing. Sarah's face lit up. Could I? Mom says not to bother people when they're working, but if you don't mind, I'd be delighted for the company. As they walked among the neat rows of vegetables and herbs, Sarah proved to be an eager student. She asked thoughtful questions about why certain plants needed more water than others, why the nuns grew their own food instead of buying it at the store, whether flowers served any purpose beyond being beautiful. Her curiosity reminded Sister Marianne of her own childhood fascination with growing things. Sister Marianne, Sarah said, as they paused beside a row of sunflowers that were just beginning to show their yellow faces. Can I ask you something kind of personal? Of course. Dear, do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you'd made different choices? Like if you'd gotten married and had kids instead of becoming a nun? The question hit Sister Marianne like a physical blow. She knelt down so she was at Sarah's eye level, buying herself time to formulate an answer that wouldn't betray the emotions churning in her chest. Sometimes, she said honestly, I think most adults wonder about the paths they didn't take. Why do you ask? I think about stuff like that sometimes. Like, what if I'd been born to different parents? Or what if my real parents had decided to keep me instead of giving me away? Sarah picked a small stone from the path and turned it over in her palm. My mom and dad told me I'm adopted. They said my birth mom was really young and couldn't take care of me, but that she loved me enough to want me to have a good family. Sister Marianne felt tears threatening and had to swallow hard before she could speak. That sounds like a very wise way to explain it. Do you think much about your birth mother? All the time, Sarah admitted. I wonder what she looks like, whether we have things in common, if she ever thinks about me. My parents say maybe someday when I'm older I might be able to meet her if I want to. But for now, they're my real parents, because they're the ones who take care of me and love me every day. The mature way Sarah spoke about her adoption suggested that her parents had handled the subject with remarkable sensitivity. Sister Marianne felt a surge of gratitude toward the Thompsons for raising her daughter with such wisdom and love. Your parents sound like very special people, she said. They are. They try really hard to answer all my questions, even the hard uns. Like when I asked if my birth mom was sad when she gave me away, Mom said she thought any mother would be sad to say goodbye to her baby. But sometimes love means making really hard choices to do what's best for someone else. Sister Marianne had to look away, pretending to examine the sunflowers while she composed herself. The Thompsons had somehow managed to explain the situation in a way that honored both the adoptive relationship and the sacrifice of the birth. Mother, Sarah clearly felt secure in her family while maintaining a healthy curiosity about her origins. That's a very grown-up way to think about it, Sister Marianne managed. I guess. Sometimes I imagine that maybe my birth mom became a teacher or a nurse or something where she helps kids. That way, even though she couldn't keep me, she'd still get to take care of children. Sarah looked up at Sister Marianne with those expressive brown eyes, kind of like you do helping kids learn about God and being good people. The innocence of the statement nearly undid Sister Marianne completely. Here was her daughter, unknowingly describing exactly the path her birth mother had taken, finding comfort in imagining scenarios that were remarkably close to reality. That's a beautiful way to think about it, Sister Marianne said, her voice slightly rough with emotion. They were interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the gravel path. A blonde woman approached, her face showing the slight concern of a mother who'd lost track of her child. Sarah, there you are. I told you to wait by the front steps. I'm sorry, Mum. Sister Marianne was showing me the garden. Look, they have sunflowers just like the ones we planted last year." The woman, who had to be Linda Thompson, looked at Sister Marianne with a mixture of apology and assessment. She was younger than Sister Marianne had expected, probably in her early 40s, with laugh lines around her eyes and an overall aura of warmth and competence. "I hope she wasn't bothering you, sister. Sarah can be quite the chatterbox when she finds someone willing to listen." "She was delightful company," Sister Marianne assured her. "We had a lovely conversation about gardening and growing things. Sarah's been fascinated by plants ever since she was tiny. We can barely keep her out of our backyard garden." Linda placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "What do you say we let Sister Marianne get back to her work?" "Can we come visit again sometime?" Sarah asked eagerly. "Maybe I could help with the weeding." Sister Marianne's heart clenched at the hopeful expression on the child's face. "I'm sure that could be arranged. We always welcome volunteers, especially ones as enthusiastic as you." As they walked away, Sarah turned back to wave, and Sister Marianne heard her singing again, softly, contentedly, the lullaby that had emerged from a broken heart 30 years ago and somehow found its way to the child it was always meant for. Standing alone in the garden as evening shadows lengthened around her, Sister Marianne finally allowed the tears to come. Her daughter was beautiful, thoughtful, loved and secure. The sacrifice she'd made had given Sarah exactly what she'd hoped for: a stable family, a happy childhood, parents who cherished her. But it had also created something Sister Marianne had never anticipated: a connection that transcended adoption papers and legal procedures, a bond that had somehow transmitted a lullaby across 30 years of separation, a love that had guided Sarah to the very place where her birth mother waited, disguised as just another nun tending a garden in the fading light. The photograph had been taken in the hospital room just 2 hours after Sarah's birth, snapped by a kind nurse who'd understood that some moments needed to be captured even when they were meant to be temporary. In the blurry image, an exhausted 19-year-old Sister Marianne, then still called by her given name, Marie Reeves, cradled a tiny infant against her chest. The baby's eyes were closed, her miniature fist curled against her mother's hospital gown, and both mother and child wore expressions of profound peace, despite the turmoil that surrounded that brief moment of connection. Sister Marianne had forgotten the nurse had given her this photo until she'd found it tucked between the pages of a book she'd brought to the hospital, a collection of prayers for expectant mothers that seemed painfully ironic now. For 30 years, it had remained hidden beneath her mattress, then later with the other artifacts of her former life, too precious to discard, but too painful to look at regularly. Now, sitting in her cell on a Wednesday evening after her encounter with Sarah and Linda Thompson in the garden, she studied the photograph with new eyes. The baby in the picture had the same dark hair as Sarah, the same delicate features, the same peaceful expression she'd worn while singing that impossible lullaby. There could no longer be any doubt. Sarah Thompson was Hope Reeves, the daughter she'd held for 4 hours before signing papers that would separate them forever. The question that kept Sister Marianne awake that night wasn't whether Sarah was her daughter, but what she was supposed to do with that knowledge. The visit to Catholic Family Services had provided confirmation, but it had also made clear the complexity of the situation. Sarah had loving parents who'd raised her for 8 years. She was thriving in their care, secure in their love, growing into exactly the kind of thoughtful, compassionate person Sister Marianne had prayed she would become. What right did she have to disrupt that happiness with revelations about biology and birth? What possible good could come from inserting herself into Sarah's life as anything more than a friendly nun who enjoyed talking about gardens? But then she remembered the lullaby, the way Sarah had known words that should have been lost to time and distance. She thought about the child's questions about her birth mother, the mature way she processed her adoption, the spiritual curiosity that had drawn her to the convent in the first place. Maybe Sarah was already seeking some connection to her origins. Maybe Sister Marianne's presence in her life was part of a larger plan she was only beginning to understand. Thursday morning brought an unexpected opportunity to explore these questions further. Sister Catherine approached her after morning prayers with news that made Sister Marianne's pulse quicken. Mrs. Rodriguez from Catholic Family Services called this morning. Sister Catherine said quietly. She asked if you might be available to speak with her sometime today. She said it was regarding your visit yesterday. Sister Marianne felt her stomach drop. Had she somehow violated protocol by visiting the agency? Were there legal complications she hadn't considered? Did she say what it was about? Nothing specific, but she sounded quite pleasant, not concerned or upset. She just said she had some additional information that might be helpful to you. An hour later, Sister Marianne found herself once again in Mrs. Rodriguez's office, though this time the social worker's expression was more excited than cautious. Sister Marianne, I'm so glad you could come back today. After our conversation yesterday, I did some additional research in your case file, and I found something quite remarkable. She opened a thick folder and withdrew a bundle of papers held together with a rubber band. These are letters from your daughter's adoptive parents, sent annually as I mentioned. But there's something specific in the most recent ones that I think you should see. Mrs. Rodriguez handed her a letter dated 6 months earlier, written in neat handwriting on cream-colored stationery. Sister Marianne's hands trembled as she read the opening lines. Dear Mrs. Rodriguez, we hope this letter finds you well. Sarah is now 8 years old and continues to thrive in every way. She's an excellent student, a talented soccer player, and the most curious child we've ever known. Lately, she's been asking more questions about her birth mother, and we wanted to seek your guidance on how to handle her growing interest in her origins. Sister Marianne looked up at Mrs. Rodriguez, who was watching her with kind eyes. Keep reading, she encouraged. The letter continued. Sarah has become fascinated with religious life lately, which surprises us since we're not particularly religious ourselves. She's been asking to visit churches and wants to know about nuns and priests and what it means to serve God. She's even started talking about maybe becoming a nun when she grows up, though at 8 years old, we know these interests may change. We're wondering if this might be connected to some genetic or biological inclination towards spirituality. We know that birth parents sometimes pass along traits and interests that manifest unexpectedly in adopted children. Sister Marianne felt tears welling in her eyes. Sarah's spiritual curiosity wasn't random. It was a connection to the path her birth mother had chosen, a calling that transcended the circumstances of their separation. There's more, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. The letter from last year mentions that Sarah has always been drawn to lullabies and songs, particularly ones about love and family. Her mother writes that Sarah seems to know songs they've never taught her, and that she often sings herself to sleep with melodies they can't identify. The confirmation of the lullaby connection sent chills through Sister Marianne's entire body. Somehow, impossibly, the song she'd composed in her hospital bed had found its way to her daughter across 30 years of separation. Whether through some inexplicable spiritual connection or through coincidence so profound it felt miraculous, Sarah carried pieces of her birth mother with her in ways that went far beyond genetics. Mrs. Rodriguez, Sister Marianne said carefully, what would happen if I wanted to make contact, not to disrupt Sarah's life or claim any parental rights, but just to be available if she ever wanted to know about her birth mother? There are several options, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. The most common is what we call a genetic and social history update. You could provide current information about yourself, your health, your life circumstances, your reasons for placement that we would keep on file. If and when Sarah expresses interest in learning about her birth mother, her parents could request this information. Sister Marianne nodded slowly. That sounds reasonable. But what if our paths have already crossed? What if she's already met me without knowing who I am? Mrs. Rodriguez raised her eyebrows. Has something like that happened? Sister Marianne took a deep breath and explained about the school tour, about Sarah's behavior in the garden, about the growing certainty that this child was her daughter. She told Mrs. Rodriguez about the lullaby, about Sarah's questions regarding religion, about the way the child seemed drawn to her specifically. When she finished, Mrs. Rodriguez sat quietly for a long moment, processing what she'd heard. Finally, she spoke. Sister Marianne, what you're describing is remarkable, but it's also delicate. If Sarah is indeed your daughter, and if she's already formed an attachment to you without knowing the connection, we need to be very careful about how we proceed. What do you mean? Children can sense connections they don't understand. If Sarah is drawn to you because of some unconscious recognition or spiritual bond, that's beautiful but also complicated. Her parents need to be involved in any decisions about revealing your relationship. They've been her family for 8 years, and they deserve to be part of this process. Sister Marianne felt a chill of fear. What if they don't want me involved in her life? What if they decide the connection is too disruptive? Then we respect their decision, Mrs. Rodriguez said gently but firmly. The primary consideration in any adoption situation is the best interest of the child. If Sarah's parents believe that knowing about your identity would be harmful to her emotional well-being, then we have to honor that judgment. The possibility of losing Sarah again, just as she'd found her, filled Sister Marianne with a grief so profound it threatened to overwhelm her. But she also recognized the wisdom in Mrs. Rodriguez's words. The Thompsons had given Sarah everything. Sister Marianne had hoped for love, stability, security, opportunity. If protecting that meant remaining in the background of her daughter's life forever, then that was a sacrifice she would have to make. What's the next step? She asked quietly. Let me contact the Thompsons, Mrs. Rodriguez said. I'll explain the situation carefully, emphasizing that you have no intention of disrupting their family or claiming parental rights. I'll tell them about your life at the convent, your reasons for seeking information, and the remarkable coincidences that have brought you and Sarah together. Then we'll see how they want to proceed. Sister Marianne nodded, though her heart felt heavy with the uncertainty of what lay ahead. How long will that take? I'll call them today. These conversations can be delicate, so I want to give them time to process the information and discuss it between themselves. I'd expect to hear back from them within a week or two. As Sister Marianne walked back to the convent that afternoon, she carried with her copies of the letters the Thompsons had written over the years, annual updates about Sarah's growth, her interests, her achievements, her questions about her origins. Reading about her daughter's development through the loving eyes of her adoptive parents was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Sarah had become exactly the kind of person Sister Marianne had hoped she would be: curious, compassionate, intelligent, secure in her family's love, but open to exploring the mysteries of her past. The photograph tucked safely in her pocket seemed to pulse with new meaning. The baby she'd held so briefly had grown into a remarkable child who somehow carried pieces of her birth mother with her, in her spiritual curiosity, in her connection to that impossible lullaby, in her instinctive recognition of something familiar, in a nun's gentle manner. Now, all Sister Marianne could do was wait and pray that the family who'd given her daughter such a beautiful life would also give them both the chance to know each other, even if only from a distance, even if only as friends who shared a garden and a love of growing things that reached toward the light. The drawing arrived on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Sarah herself with the kind of breathless excitement that only 8-year-olds can muster. Sister Marianne was in the chapel arranging fresh flowers from the garden when she heard small footsteps echoing in the stone corridor. She turned to find Sarah standing in the doorway, clutching a folded piece of construction paper and looking slightly uncertain about interrupting prayer time. "I'm sorry to bother you, Sister Marianne," Sarah said quietly, "but I made something for you, and Mum said I could bring it over as long as I didn't interrupt anything important." "You're never a bother, dear," Sister Marianne assured her, setting down the vase of roses she'd been arranging. "And this isn't interrupting at all. What do you have there?" Sarah's face lit up as she unfolded the paper to reveal a crayon drawing that took Sister Marianne's breath away. The picture showed a woman in brown robes standing in a garden filled with impossibly large sunflowers and tomatoes. The woman's face was carefully detailed with brown eyes and a gentle smile, her hands reaching toward plants that seemed to glow with their own inner light. At the bottom of the page, in Sarah's careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "The nice nun who knows about growing things." "It's you," Sarah explained unnecessarily, bouncing slightly on her toes with enthusiasm. "I wanted to draw something to say thank you for showing me your garden and answering all my questions. Do you like it?" Sister Marianne took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly, studying every detail Sarah had included. The nun in the picture looked younger than Sister Marianne felt, more peaceful than she'd been in years, surrounded by an abundance of life and growth that seemed to represent something beyond mere gardening. In the child's artistic interpretation, the nun wasn't just tending plants. She was nurturing life itself, creating beauty and sustenance with her careful attention. "It's absolutely beautiful," Sister Marianne said, and meant it. "You're quite an artist, Sarah. This will go in a very special place where I can look at it every day." "Really? You're not just being nice?" "I never say things I don't mean," Sister Marianne assured her. "This is one of the most thoughtful gifts anyone has ever given me." Sarah beamed at the praise, then settled herself on one of the chapel pews, as if she belonged there. "Sister Marianne, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you think some people are born knowing things they're supposed to do? Like maybe God tells them before they're born what their job is going to be?" The question was so unexpected and so profound that Sister Marianne had to sit down beside Sarah to give it the consideration it deserved. "That's a very deep question. What made you think about it?" "Well, sometimes I feel like I know things I shouldn't know. Like that lullaby I was singing in your garden. I can't remember anyone teaching it to me, but I've always known it. And when I'm in churches or around nuns like you, I feel really peaceful, like I'm supposed to be there. My mom and dad are wonderful, but they don't really understand why I get so excited about religious stuff." Sister Marianne felt her heart clench. Here was her daughter, at only 8 years old, articulating the kind of spiritual calling that had driven Sister Marianne herself to religious life. The connection between them wasn't just biological, it was vocational, a shared sense of being drawn towards something larger than themselves. "I think," Sister Marianne said carefully, "that some people do have callings that feel like they've always been part of them. But I also think those callings can change and grow as we do. At 8 years old, you have plenty of time to explore different interests and see where your heart leads you. But what if I already know? What if I've known since I was really little that I want to help people and serve God, just like you do?" The innocent certainty in Sarah's voice was both beautiful and heartbreaking. Sister Marianne wanted to encourage the child's spiritual curiosity while also honoring her parents' role in guiding her development. "If that's truly your calling, Sarah, it will still be there when you're older and ready to make those kinds of decisions. In the meantime, there are lots of ways to serve God and help people even as a child. Like what? Like being kind to classmates who seem lonely, like helping your parents with chores without being asked, like visiting places like this convent and asking thoughtful questions that help adults think about their own faith in new ways. Sarah nodded solemnly, processing this advice. Then her expression brightened. Could I help you with the garden? Sometimes, not just visiting but actually working. I'm really good at pulling weeds, and I promise I'd be careful with the plants. The request filled Sister Marianne with a mixture of joy and trepidation. Having Sarah around regularly would be a gift beyond measure, a chance to know her daughter in ways she'd never imagined possible. But it would also mean living with the constant awareness of their true relationship, maintaining the fiction of their casual friendship while her heart broke and healed repeatedly in Sarah's presence. I think that would be wonderful, she said. Finally, but we'd need to make sure your parents are comfortable with you spending that much time here. They will be. They're always saying I need to find productive ways to use my energy, and they really like you. Mom said you seem like exactly the kind of person she'd want me to learn from. The irony of Linda Thompson's statement wasn't lost on Sister Marianne. The woman had no idea she was encouraging her daughter to spend time with her birth mother, but her instincts were somehow guiding her toward exactly that connection. Over the following weeks, Sarah became a regular presence at the convent garden. She arrived most afternoons after school, having walked the 6 blocks from her house with her parents' permission and a list of safety rules they'd established. She was a natural gardener, gentle with seedlings but fearless about pulling up. Stubborn weeds, curious about everything from soil composition to the life cycle of butterflies that visited their flowers. More importantly, she was exceptional company. Sarah asked questions that pushed Sister Marianne to think more deeply about her faith, her choices, her understanding of God's plan for human lives. She told stories about school and friends and family adventures that painted a picture of a child who was deeply loved and thoroughly secure in that love. She sang while she worked, sometimes hymns she'd learned at the rare church services her family attended, sometimes popular songs from the radio, and occasionally that haunting lullaby that never failed to bring tears to Sister Marianne's eyes. Other sisters began to notice Sarah's regular presence, and their reactions were mixed. Sister Catherine seemed charmed by the child's enthusiasm and good manners. Sister Joan, who was in her 70s and sometimes impatient with disruptions to routine, grumbled about children underfoot in sacred spaces. Mother Superior Agnes watched the developing relationship with the careful attention of someone who sensed undercurrents she didn't fully understand. Sister Marianne, Mother Superior said one evening after Sarah had gone home, that child seems quite attached to you. Is everything appropriate with this relationship? The question caught Sister Marianne off guard. Of course, Mother Superior. Sarah is simply a child who's interested in gardening and spiritual matters. I enjoy teaching her, and her parents are supportive of her visits. I'm sure they are. But I've noticed that you seem particularly invested in this friendship. You light up when she arrives, and you seem subdued after she leaves. I just want to make sure you're maintaining appropriate boundaries. Sister Marianne felt heat rise in her cheeks. Even without knowing the truth, Mother Superior had detected the intensity of her feelings for Sarah. I care about all the children who visit us here. Sarah is simply an especially thoughtful and engaged student. Mother Superior nodded, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely satisfied with this explanation. Just remember, sister, that our primary commitment is to our community and our service to God. Individual relationships, however meaningful, must never compromise those larger obligations. That night, as Sister Marianne knelt in her cell for evening prayers, she stared at Sarah's drawing, which she'd pinned to the wall beside her small wooden cross. The child had drawn her as she'd never seen herself, as someone who brought life and light into the world through her patient cultivation of growing things. In Sarah's innocent artistic vision, Sister Marianne wasn't a woman haunted by loss and regret, but a nurturing presence who helped beautiful things flourish. Perhaps that was who she could become, if she was careful, if she was patient, if she found a way to love her daughter from a distance that honored both their connection and the family that had raised Sarah with such wisdom and devotion. The drawing was both a gift and a promise, evidence that love could grow in unexpected places, taking root in the space between what was lost and what could still be found. The phone call came on a Thursday evening in late September, just as the convent was settling into the quiet rhythm of evening prayers. Sister Catherine knocked urgently on Sister Marianne's cell door, her face pale with concern. "Sister Marianne, there's someone on the phone for you. Mrs. Rodriguez from Catholic Family Services. She says it's urgent regarding Sarah Thompson." Sister Marianne's blood turned to ice. In the 3 weeks since Mrs. Rodriguez had promised to contact the Thompsons, she'd heard nothing. She'd begun to hope that no news was good news, that perhaps the family was taking time to consider the situation carefully. But the urgency in Sister Catherine's voice suggested that something had gone terribly wrong. The convent's single telephone sat on a small table in Mother Superior's office. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was tense when Sister Marianne picked up the receiver. "Sister Marianne, I'm sorry to call so late, but we have a situation. Sarah Thompson has been hospitalized with a severe allergic reaction. Her parents are trying to provide the doctors with her complete medical history, but they've run into some complications that require information only you can provide." "What kind of complications?" Sister Marianne asked, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear her own voice. Sarah had a severe reaction to a medication she was given for a minor infection. The reaction was so unusual that the doctors suspect it might be connected to a rare genetic condition. Without detailed information about her biological family's medical history, they're having trouble determining the safest treatment options. Sister Marianne closed her eyes, remembering the sealed envelope she'd hidden away 30 years ago, the letter she'd written to her daughter but never sent, containing not just words of love and explanation, but crucial information about her family's medical background, including her grandfather's rare blood disorder that could cause severe reactions to certain medications. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I have information that might help. Medical history that I documented years ago, but never had a way to share." "Thank God," Mrs. Rodriguez breathed. "Sister Marianne, I need to ask you something difficult. Sarah's parents want to meet with you directly, tonight if possible. The doctors need this information quickly, and Linda Thompson specifically requested that you bring any documentation you might have about your family's medical history." The prospect of meeting the Thompsons under these circumstances filled Sister Marianne with both hope and terror. After 30 years of wondering about the people who'd raised her daughter, she was going to meet them in a hospital room while Sarah fought off a potentially life-threatening reaction. "I'll come immediately," she said. "Which hospital?" "St. Mary's 4th floor pediatric unit, room 412, and Sister Marianne. Linda Thompson asked me to tell you something. She said that Sarah has been asking for the nice nun from the garden since she's been in the hospital. She apparently told her parents that she feels safer when you're around, and she's been asking when you might visit." Sister Marianne felt tears spring to her eyes. Even in illness, even without understanding their true connection, Sarah was seeking the comfort of her birth mother's presence. "I'll be there within the hour." The bus ride to St. Mary's Hospital gave Sister Marianne time to retrieve the sealed envelope from its hiding place and prepare herself for what lay ahead. The letter she'd written to her daughter 30 years ago contained everything she'd never been able to say. Explanations about her decision, promises of love that would never die, and detailed information about both sides of Sarah's biological family, including medical histories that could prove crucial now. The pediatric unit was quieter than she'd expected, painted in soft colors meant to comfort anxious children and worried parents. Room 412 sat at the end of a long corridor, its door slightly ajar. Sister Marianne paused outside, gathering courage before knocking gently. "Come in," came a voice she recognized as Linda Thompson's. Sister Marianne entered to find a scene that broke her heart. Sarah lay in the hospital bed, looking small and pale against the white sheets, an IV line running into her arm. Her dark hair was damp with perspiration, and her usual bright energy was replaced by the listless exhaustion of illness. Beside the bed sat a woman with blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, Linda Thompson, looking older and more tired than she had in the garden. Across the room stood a tall man with dark hair and worried eyes who could only be Sarah's father. "Sister Marianne!" Sarah's voice was weak but filled with relief. "Mom said you might come see me. I was hoping you would." Sister Marianne approached the bed, her heart breaking at the sight of her daughter's illness. "Hello, sweetheart. How are you feeling?" "Kind of yucky, but better now that you're here," Sarah admitted. "The doctors gave me medicine that made me really sick, but they think they figured out what went wrong." Linda Thompson stood up, extending her hand to Sister Marianne. "Sister, thank you so much for coming. I'm Linda Thompson, and this is my husband David." Mrs. Rodriguez explained the situation to us. Sister Marianne shook both their hands, studying the faces of the people who'd raised her daughter with such obvious love and care. They looked exhausted and worried, but also remarkably composed given the circumstances. "Mrs. Rodriguez said you might have medical information that could help the doctors," David Thompson said. "We're grateful for anything you can provide. The reaction Sarah had was so severe and unusual that the doctors are concerned about what medications might be safe to give her in the future." Sister Marianne reached into her pocket and withdrew the sealed envelope she'd carried for 3 decades. Her hands trembled as she looked at Sarah's name written in her own young handwriting, along with the words, "to be opened on her 18th birthday, or in case of medical emergency." "I wrote this letter years ago," she said quietly. "It contains detailed medical histories for both sides of Sarah's biological family, including information about a rare blood disorder that my grandfather had. The condition can cause severe reactions to certain types of antibiotics and pain medications." Linda Thompson's eyes widened. "That could explain everything. The doctor said Sarah's reaction was consistent with a rare genetic condition, but they couldn't identify it without knowing her family history." Sister Marianne handed the envelope to Linda, though doing so felt like giving away pieces of her soul. "There's more than just medical information in there," she warned. "I wrote it as a letter to Sarah for when she was old enough to understand. But given the circumstances, would you like to read it to her?" Linda asked gently. "I think it might comfort her to hear it from you." Sister Marianne looked at David Thompson, seeking his permission as well. He nodded, though she could see the complexity of emotions playing across his face, gratitude for the potentially life-saving information, mixed with the natural concern of a father watching his daughter connect with her biological mother. Sarah perked up slightly at the prospect of hearing the letter. "Is it really for me? You wrote me a letter a long time ago." "I did, sweetheart. I wrote it when you were just a tiny baby, hoping that someday you'd be able to read it and understand how much your birth mother loved you." Sister Marianne opened the envelope with shaking hands and began to read. "My dearest daughter, if you're reading this letter, it means you're old enough to understand some difficult truths about love, sacrifice, and the choices we make when we Want what's best for someone more than we want our own happiness. When you were born, you were the most beautiful, perfect baby I had ever seen. I held you for 4 hours, and in that time I memorized every detail of your face, every sound you made, every tiny movement of your perfect little hands. Sarah listened with rapt attention, her eyes growing wide as she began to understand what she was hearing. I gave you to your parents, not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you more than I loved my own comfort. I wanted you to have 2 parents who were ready to give you everything I couldn't provide: a stable home, financial security, and most importantly, the freedom to be a child without worrying about adult problems. Your parents waited years for you, prayed for you, dreamed about the day they would hold you. They were chosen specifically because they would love you exactly as much as I did, but with the resources to give you the life you deserved. As Sister Marianne read, she watched Linda and David Thompson's faces. Instead of discomfort or resentment, she saw recognition and respect. These were people who understood sacrifice, who had built their family on love rather than biology, who could honor the woman who'd made their happiness possible. The letter continued with detailed medical histories, family traits, and finally, the words Sister Marianne had never thought she'd have the chance to speak aloud. If we ever meet, I want you to know that not a single day has passed when I haven't thought about you, prayed for you, and hoped that you were growing up to be the remarkable person I knew you would become. You are loved beyond measure by more people than you can imagine, by the parents who chose you, by the birth mother who gave you life, and by God, who has a special plan for your life. When she finished reading, the room was silent except for the quiet hum of medical equipment. Sarah reached out with her small hand and touched Sister Marianne's arm. "So you're my birth mom," she said simply. "I kind of wondered about that. You felt familiar from the very first time I met you." Sister Marianne nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, sweetheart, I'm your birth mother, and these are your real parents, the people who've loved you and raised you and made you into the wonderful person you are." Linda Thompson wiped tears from her own eyes. "Sarah, honey, does this change anything for you? Does it make you feel differently about our family?" Sarah considered the question with the seriousness she brought to all important matters. "It makes me feel like I have even more people who love me," she said finally. "Like I'm extra lucky, instead of different." David Thompson cleared his throat, emotion evident in his voice. "Sister Marianne, we can never thank you enough for the life you gave Sarah, for the medical information that may have saved her, and for the way you've been such a positive presence in her life, without ever overstepping boundaries we weren't ready to cross." Sister Marianne looked around the hospital room at this family she'd helped create, at her daughter, who was surrounded by love from multiple directions, at parents who'd been generous enough to share their child with the woman who'd given her life. The sacrifice she'd made 30 years ago had led to this moment, not the reunion she'd dreamed of, but something richer and more complex. Sarah was safe. She was loved. She was exactly where she belonged. And now, for the first time since signing those adoption papers, Sister Marianne could be part of that love, instead of just hoping for it from a distance. In the days following Sarah's hospitalization, Sister Marianne found herself living in a strange new reality. The secret she'd carried for 30 years was no longer a secret, at least not among the small circle of people who mattered most. Sarah knew she was her birth mother. Linda and David Thompson had welcomed her into their family's extended orbit with a grace that still took her breath away. And the medical information in her confession journal, the detailed records she'd kept of her prayers, her thoughts, and her family history, had proven crucial in developing a treatment plan that would protect Sarah from future allergic reactions. The confession journal itself had become an unexpected bridge between worlds. Sister Marianne had started keeping it shortly after taking her final vows, initially as a way to process her grief and guilt about the daughter she'd given up. Over the years, it had evolved into a comprehensive record of her spiritual journey, her questions about God's plan, her prayers for Sarah's well-being, and detailed information about both sides of Sarah's biological family that went far beyond basic medical histories. When Dr. Martinez, Sarah's pediatrician, had requested additional family background that might help predict other potential health issues, Sister Marianne had made the difficult decision to share relevant portions of the journal with the Thompsons. The entries revealed not just medical facts, but 30 years of a mother's love channeled into prayer and careful documentation. October 15th, 1995, she'd written in one early entry. Sarah would be 18 months old today. I pray she's walking. Now maybe saying a few words. My grandmother always said the women in our family were early talkers. I hope Sarah inherited that gift for language, along with grandmother's strong constitution, but not her tendency toward anxiety. March 15th, 2001, read another entry from Sarah's 7th birthday. I wonder if she likes books the way I did at her age. My mother was a teacher before she married. I pray that love of learning has somehow found its way to Sarah. I've been thinking about the hereditary heart murmur on her grandfather's side. It's usually harmless, but doctors should know about it if she ever needs surgery. Reading these entries aloud to Linda and David Thompson had been one of the most emotionally challenging experiences of Sister Marianne's life. Here was evidence of 30 years of mothering from a distance, a love so complete it had documented every family trait, every medical concern, every prayer for a child's well-being, all carefully recorded in case it might someday prove useful to the daughter she'd never expected to know. The Thompsons had been visibly moved by the depth of Sister Marianne's ongoing care for their daughter. "You never stopped being her mother," Linda had said quietly. "You just found a different way to express it." Now, as Sister Marianne sat in Mother Superior Agnes's office, she faced a different kind of reckoning. Agnes had requested this meeting after hearing about Sarah's hospitalization and Sister Marianne's role in providing crucial medical information. While the other sisters knew only that Sister Marianne had helped a local family during a medical emergency, Agnes had put together enough pieces to suspect a deeper story. "Sister Marianne," Agnes began, her tone more concerned than accusatory. "I need to understand what's been happening with the Thompson family. Sister Catherine mentioned that you've been receiving phone calls from social services, that you spent several evenings at the hospital, and that you've become quite involved with this particular child's welfare. These circumstances suggest a personal connection that goes beyond our usual community outreach." Sister Marianne had been dreading this conversation, but she also recognized that continued secrecy was no longer possible or appropriate. "Mother Superior, Sarah Thompson is my biological daughter. I gave birth to her 30 years ago, before I joined this community, and gave her up for adoption through Catholic Family Services." Agnes sat back in her chair, absorbing this revelation. "I see. And you've recently discovered her identity?" "She was part of a school group that toured our convent several months ago. I recognized something in her. The resemblance was unmistakable once I paid attention. I confirmed her identity through the adoption agency, and then circumstances forced us to meet under medical emergency conditions." "Circumstances forced you? Sister Marianne, please help me understand how passive you were in this process. Did you actively seek out information about this child, or did the reunion happen entirely by coincidence?" The question was fair, but difficult to answer with complete honesty. Initially, it was coincidence, but once I suspected who she was, I did visit the adoption agency to confirm my suspicions. I never intended to disrupt her family or claim any parental rights. I was simply struggling with the knowledge of her identity and seeking guidance about How to handle the situation ethically? Agnes nodded slowly. And her adoptive parents? How have they responded to learning about your identity? With remarkable grace, Sister Marianne admitted. Linda and David Thompson are exceptional people. They've included me in Sarah's medical care because I had information that was crucial to her treatment. They've never made me feel like an intruder or threat. If anything, they seem grateful that Sarah has another adult in her life who cares deeply about her well-being. That's certainly a blessing. But Sister Marianne, I have concerns about how this development affects your commitment to our community and your vows. Your obvious attachment to this child, while understandable, represents a significant emotional investment outside our religious family. How do you intend to balance these competing loyalties? The question struck at the heart of Sister Marianne's own struggles over the past several months. Her love for Sarah was undeniable and growing stronger with each interaction. But her commitment to religious life, to this community that had shaped her for 30 years, remained equally strong. Mother Superior, my relationship with Sarah has actually deepened my faith rather than conflicting with it. For 30 years, I've wondered whether I made the right choice in giving her up for adoption. Seeing who she's become, meeting the family who raised her, being able to provide help when she needed it. All of this feels like confirmation that God's plan was larger and more generous than I could have imagined as a frightened 19-year-old. That's a beautiful way to frame it. But practically speaking, how do you see this relationship developing? Will you maintain regular contact with the child? Will you attend family events, school functions, birthday parties? Where do you draw the lines between being a supportive presence and becoming an active co-parent? These were questions Sister Marianne had been wrestling with in her prayers. The Thompsons had suggested that she might visit Sarah regularly, perhaps continue their gardening sessions, maybe even attend some of Sarah's school events, if she was comfortable with that level of involvement. But they'd also been clear that they would respect whatever boundaries Sister Marianne needed to maintain to honor her religious commitments. I believe there's a way to love Sarah and support her family while still maintaining my primary commitment to this community, Sister Marianne said carefully. Sarah understands that I'm a nun first, that my service to God is the foundation of my life. She doesn't need me to be a conventional mother figure. She has wonderful parents for that. But I think I can be something unique in her life, a spiritual mentor, a bridge to her biological heritage, someone who loves her unconditionally but without the daily responsibilities of parenting. Agnes considered this explanation thoughtfully, and if Sarah begins to need more from you than you can give while honoring your vows, children's needs evolve as they grow. What feels manageable now might become more complicated when she's a teenager dealing with identity questions or young adult struggling with major life decisions. Then we'll navigate those challenges as they arise with honesty and prayer and the wisdom of everyone who loves Sarah. I can't predict every scenario, Mother Superior, but I trust that the same God who brought us together will guide us in finding the right balance. There's one more consideration, Agnes said gently. The other sisters have begun to notice changes in your behavior and energy. You're more animated, more emotionally invested in outside concerns. Some have expressed worry that your focus has shifted away from our community life. How do you address those concerns? Sister Marianne felt a flush of guilt. She'd been aware of her own distraction, the way her thoughts turned constantly to Sarah even during prayer time, the eager anticipation she felt when expecting one of the child's visits. You're right that my emotional energy has been redirected, but I don't think that's necessarily unhealthy. For 30 years, I've carried grief and uncertainty about my daughter. Now that I know she's safe and thriving, that burden has been lifted in ways I didn't expect. I think I'm actually more present to our community now because I'm not constantly wondering and worrying about her. It was partially true, though Sister Marianne recognized that her new connection to Sarah had also created fresh challenges for her spiritual focus. The joy of knowing her daughter was balanced by the constant effort required to maintain appropriate boundaries, to love without possessing, to be present without overstepping. Sister Marianne, I want you to know that this community supports you, and we're not asking you to choose between your daughter and your calling. But I do think you need some time to process these changes and determine how to integrate them into your religious life in a sustainable way. I'm going to recommend that you spend some time in spiritual direction, perhaps a weekend retreat, to pray through these questions and seek clarity about the path forward. Sister Marianne nodded gratefully. The suggestion of structured spiritual guidance felt like exactly what she needed to navigate this new terrain. Thank you, Mother Superior. I think that would be very helpful. As she left Agnes's office, Sister Marianne felt simultaneously relieved and apprehensive. The truth was out, the questions were being asked, and the hard work of building a sustainable relationship with her daughter, one that honored all her commitments and relationships, was just beginning. But for the first time in 30 years, she felt like the foundation was solid. Sarah was loved, protected, and thriving. Her adoptive parents were wise and generous people who understood the complexity of family created through love rather than biology. And Sister Marianne herself was finally able to love her daughter openly, even if that love needed to be expressed within carefully maintained boundaries. The rest, she decided, could be worked out with time, prayer, and the kind of patience that had sustained her through 3 decades of wandering. Love had found a way to bring them together. Love would find a way to keep them connected while honoring all the other loves that shaped their lives. The family Bible had been in the Thompson household since David's grandmother gave it to them as a wedding present 15 years earlier. It was a substantial volume, bound in deep brown leather, with gilt-edged pages and a family record section where significant events were meant to be documented for future generations. Linda Thompson had faithfully recorded their wedding date, David's parents' deaths, Sarah's adoption finalization, her first steps, first words, first day of school, all the milestones that marked a life being lived in love and careful attention. Now, on a quiet Sunday evening in October, Linda sat at their kitchen table with the Bible open to the family records page, a black pen in her hand, trying to find the right words to document the most extraordinary addition to their family story. October 15th, 2024, Sarah met her birth mother, Sister Marianne Reeves, during a medical emergency. Sister Marianne provided crucial family medical history that helped doctors treat Sarah's severe allergic reaction. We are grateful for this connection and for the love that has surrounded our daughter from multiple directions since her birth. The words felt inadequate for the magnitude of what had happened, but Linda wasn't sure how to capture the complex emotions of the past few weeks in a simple family record. How do you document the moment when your family expands in ways you never expected? How do you express gratitude for a woman who gave you the greatest gift imaginable, then stepped back with such grace that her presence felt like blessing rather than disruption? David found her there an hour later, still staring at the page with tears in her eyes. "Honey, what's wrong?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "I'm trying to write about Sister Marianne, about what happened with Sarah, but I can't find the right words. This is the most important thing that's ever happened to our family, besides Sarah coming to us in the first place, and I don't know how to capture it." David looked at what she'd written, then took the pen from her hand. "Maybe we don't need to capture all of it right now. Maybe we just need to mark the moment and trust that the rest of the story will unfold as it's meant to." He wrote beneath. Linda's entry. Sarah's birth mother has become part of our extended family. We are learning that love multiplies rather than divides, and that God's plan for families is bigger and more beautiful than we ever imagined. Linda read his addition. and felt some of the tension in her chest ease. That's perfect, simple but true. Are you having doubts about letting Sister Marianne into our lives? David asked gently. Because if you are, we can talk about adjusting the boundaries we've set. Linda shook her head quickly. No, not doubts. If anything, I'm amazed by how right this feels. When I watch Sarah with Sister Marianne, I see something I never expected. They have this connection that has nothing to do with taking anything away from us, and everything to do with adding depth to Sarah's understanding of herself. Then what's making you emotional? Gratitude, Linda admitted, and maybe a little fear that we won't handle this right. Sister Marianne has been so careful, so respectful of our role as Sarah's parents. She's never made us feel threatened or inadequate. But what if we say or do something that damages this delicate balance we've found? David took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. Linda, look at what we've already navigated. A medical emergency that could have been devastating. Revelations about Sarah's identity that could have turned our world upside down, and the introduction of a birth parent who had every right to disrupt our family if she'd chosen to. Instead, we found ourselves working together to take care of Sarah, and it felt natural. It felt like exactly what was supposed to happen. You're right, Linda said, though her voice still carried traces of uncertainty. I just keep thinking about the future. What happens when Sarah gets older and starts asking harder questions about her adoption? What happens if she decides she wants Sister Marianne to play a bigger role in her life? What if she goes through a phase where she's angry at us for some reason and turns to Sister Marianne instead? Then we'll handle those challenges the same way we've handled everything else about raising Sarah, with love, honesty, and the understanding that our job is to help her become the person she's meant to be, not to keep her dependent on us forever. Linda nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his words, even as part of her heart struggled with the implications. I love that woman, she said quietly. I love Sister Marianne for giving Sarah life, for making the hardest choice imaginable to ensure Sarah had the best possible start in life, and for the way she's handled this reunion. But I'm also terrified of loving her, because loving her means accepting that Sarah's heart has room for more people than just us. Sarah's capacity to love has never been limited, David pointed out. She loves her teachers, her friends, her soccer coach, her grandparents. Adding Sister Marianne to that circle doesn't diminish her love for us. It just proves that she's exactly the kind of person we hoped she'd become. Open-hearted, generous, able to see connections and possibilities where others might see complications. As if summoned by their conversation about her, Sarah appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Why are you guys talking about Sister Marianne? Is everything okay? Linda and David exchanged a look. Then Linda opened her arms to their daughter. Everything's fine, sweetheart. We were just talking about how grateful we are that Sister Marianne is in our lives now. Sarah climbed onto Linda's lap, though at 8 years old, she was getting almost too big for such comfort-seeking. Are you worried that I love her too much? The directness of the question caught both parents off guard. What makes you think we might be worried about that? David asked. Because sometimes I catch you guys looking at me funny when I talk about her, like you're trying to figure out if I still love you as much as I used to. Linda felt her heart clench at her daughter's perceptiveness. Oh, sweetheart, we never doubt that you love us, but you're right that we've been trying to understand how to share you with Sister Marianne in a way that feels good for everyone. You don't have to share me, Sarah said matter-of-factly. There's not less love when there are more people to love. There's just more love, period. Sister Marianne taught me that when we were talking about the plants in her garden, how adding more flowers doesn't make the garden worse, it makes it better. David felt tears prick his eyes at his daughter's wisdom. You're absolutely right, Sarah. We're still learning how to think about our family growing in new ways. Sarah snuggled closer to Linda, her voice growing drowsy again. I'm really happy that I know who my birth mum is, and I'm really happy that she's someone who loves God and grows things and listens to me when I have questions. But you guys are still my real parents. You're the ones who take care of me when I'm sick, help me with homework, and make sure I brush my teeth every night." Linda kissed the top of Sarah's head, marveling at how this child could articulate truths that adults struggle to understand. "We love you so much, Sarah, and we love that Sister Marianne is part of our family now." As they tucked Sarah back into bed, Linda felt the last of her anxieties settle into something more manageable. Their daughter was right. Love multiplied rather than divided. The challenge wasn't protecting their family from Sister Marianne's presence, but learning how to expand their definition of family to include the woman whose sacrifice had made their happiness possible. The hand-knitted baby blanket had been the last thing Sister Marianne completed before giving birth to Sarah. During those final weeks of pregnancy, when walking became difficult and sleep came in fragments, she'd worked on it obsessively, tiny, perfect stitches in soft yellow yarn, since she hadn't known whether she was carrying a boy or girl. The pattern was one her own grandmother had taught her, a simple but elegant design of interlocking hearts that created a chain across the entire blanket, as if love itself was being woven into every fiber. She'd planned to give it to the baby during those 4 precious hours they'd spent together in the hospital. But when the time came to say goodbye, when the adoption counselor arrived with the papers that would finalize Sarah's placement, Sister Marianne couldn't bear to let the blanket go too. She'd already given up her child. Keeping this one tangible symbol of her love had felt necessary for survival. For 30 years, the blanket had remained hidden with her other treasures, wrapped in tissue paper that she changed annually to prevent yellowing or deterioration. She'd imagined in her most private moments that someday she might find a way to give it to her daughter, perhaps on her 18th birthday, perhaps on her wedding day, perhaps never at all. She'd never imagined giving it to an 8-year-old who was recovering from a medical emergency, but who had just learned the identity of her birth mother. Now, sitting in Sarah's hospital room 3 days after the revelation of their relationship, Sister Marianne held the carefully wrapped package in her lap while Sarah, Linda, and David Thompson waited expectantly. Sarah's color had improved dramatically since the doctors had adjusted her treatment based on the medical history Sister Marianne had provided, but she was still weak and would need several more days of observation before being discharged. "Sarah," Sister Marianne began, her voice trembling slightly, "when you were born, I made something for you. I kept it all these years, hoping that someday I might be able to give it to you. I think now is the right time." Sarah's eyes widened with curiosity as Sister Marianne unwrapped the tissue paper to reveal the yellow blanket, its heart pattern still perfectly preserved, the yarn as soft as the day she'd finished the final row. "It's beautiful," Linda breathed, reaching out to touch the delicate stitches. "You made this yourself during the last month of my pregnancy. My grandmother taught me this pattern when I was about Sarah's age. She said the hearts represent all the people who love you, connected in an unbreakable chain." Sister Marianne unfolded the blanket fully, revealing its generous size and the intricate work that had gone into every inch. "I worked on it whenever I felt scared about the future, whenever I worried about whether I was making the right choices. It helped me feel like I was still doing something to take care of you, even though I knew I wouldn't be able to keep you." Sarah reached out with both hands to touch the blanket, her fingers tracing the pattern of hearts with reverent care. "You made this for me before I was even born?" "I did, and I've kept it safe all these years, hoping that someday I'd find a way to give it to you." "Can I wrap up in it?" Sarah asked, looking to her parents for permission. Linda and David nodded, and Sister Marianne helped Sarah pull the blanket around her shoulders. It was exactly the right size, not too small for her 8-year-old frame, but not so large that it would be impractical to use. The yellow color complemented Sarah's dark hair and warm brown skin, and the softness of the yarn seemed to ease some of the hospital room's clinical harshness. "It feels like a hug," Sarah said quietly, snuggling deeper into the blanket's folds. "Like a really long hug that lasted for 8 whole years until you could give it to me in person." The simplicity and accuracy of her daughter's description made Sister Marianne's eyes fill with tears. "That's exactly what it was meant to be, sweetheart. A hug that could last until we found each other again." David Thompson cleared his throat, emotion evident in his voice. "Sister Marianne, this is incredibly meaningful. Would you mind if I took a picture? This feels like a moment Sarah should have documented." "Of course." As David took several photos of Sarah wrapped in the blanket, some with Sister Marianne beside her, some with all 3 parents in the frame, Linda found herself marveling at how natural this all felt. A month ago, she couldn't have imagined sharing her daughter's most significant moments with another mother figure. Now, watching Sister Marianne's joy as Sarah delighted in the blanket, Linda felt only gratitude for the love that had been woven into their lives, along with those carefully crafted stitches. "Mum, Dad," Sarah said, looking up at her adoptive parents while still clutching the blanket, "can we put this on my bed at home? I want to use it every night so I can remember that. I have so many people loving me all at once." "Of course we can," Linda said, her voice thick with emotion. "I think it would be perfect in your room." Sister Marianne watched this exchange with a heart so full it felt like it might burst. Her daughter was exactly the person she'd prayed. She would become generous, thoughtful, secure enough in her parents' love to embrace additional love without fear or conflict. The blanket wasn't just finding its intended recipient, it was finding its place in a family that had room for all kinds of love, all kinds of connections, all kinds of ways to care for a child who'd been blessed with multiple parents who wanted nothing more than her happiness. As evening fell and visiting hours came to an end, Sister Marianne prepared to leave Sarah with her parents for another night of recovery. But this time, when she kissed Sarah's forehead goodbye, her daughter was wrapped in tangible proof of 30 years of love, surrounded by people who understood that family was something you created through dedication and care, rather than something determined solely by genetics. The chain of hearts had found its way home at last, carrying with it all the love that had been stitched into its creation, and all the love that would continue to surround the child it was meant to comfort. 6 months later, the new photograph sat in a simple wooden frame on Sister Marianne's small desk beside her worn prayer book and the drawing Sarah had made of the nice nun who knows about growing things. In the picture, taken during Sarah's 9th birthday celebration at the convent, 4 people smiled at the camera with the relaxed happiness of family. Sarah in the center, glowing with health and joy, Linda and David Thompson on either side. Of her, their faces showing the contentment of parents who'd successfully navigated one of parenting's most complex challenges. And Sister Marianne, her arm around Sarah's shoulder, looking more peaceful than she'd felt in 30 years. The birthday celebration had been David Thompson's idea. Sarah keeps talking about how she wants to share her birthday with both her families, he'd explained during one of their regular phone conversations. "Would you and the other sisters be comfortable hosting a small party in the convent garden? Nothing elaborate, just cake and a few friends from school." The party had been perfect in its simplicity. 8 little girls had run through the garden, paths, admiring the spring vegetables and asking dozens of questions about religious life. They'd eaten chocolate cake at tables set up beneath the apple trees, played games that Sister Catherine had organized, and listened to Sarah explain proudly that Sister Marianne was my birth mom, who's also a nun, which makes me extra special, because not everyone has a mom who talks to God every day. The ease with which Sarah integrated both families into her understanding of herself had been perhaps the most remarkable aspect of the past 6 months. She spent every Saturday afternoon at the convent now, working in the garden with Sister Marianne and whoever else might be available. She'd become something of a mascot for the entire community. The younger sisters enjoyed her energy and endless questions, while the elderly nuns were charmed by her respectful curiosity about their way of life. Mother Superior Agnes had initially worried that Sarah's regular presence might disrupt the convent's contemplative atmosphere, but the opposite had proven true. The child's natural reverence for sacred spaces, combined with her genuine interest in spiritual matters, had added a dimension of joy and purpose to community life that none of them had anticipated. When Sarah asked why the sisters prayed so often, or how they knew what God wanted them to do, her questions pushed everyone to examine their faith more deeply. "She's made us all better at explaining what we believe and why," Sister Catherine had observed. "Having to answer her questions has strengthened my own understanding of our calling." For Sister Marianne, the past 6 months had been a masterclass in learning how to love without possessing, how to be present without overstepping, how to honor both her religious vows and her maternal heart. There had been challenging moments when Sarah had a bad day at school and wanted to call Sister Marianne instead of going to her parents first, when she'd asked if she could live at the convent when she grew up, when she'd wondered aloud why Sister Marianne couldn't just be a regular mom like other kids had. Each of these moments had required careful navigation, honest conversations between all the adults involved, and gentle redirection of Sarah's understanding about the different roles people played in her life. Linda and David Thompson had been unfailingly generous in these discussions, never making Sister Marianne feel like she was intruding on their parental territory, while also being clear about maintaining appropriate boundaries. "The most important thing," Linda had said during one particularly thoughtful conversation, "is that Sarah understands she's not responsible for managing the relationships between the adults in her life. She gets to love all of us freely, and we get to figure out how to make that work." That wisdom had guided them through the inevitable growing pains of their unusual family structure. When Sarah's teacher had asked about emergency contacts and been confused by the inclusion of a nun, they'd handled it matter-of-factly. When other children had asked why Sarah had 3 parents, she'd explained simply that some families were made in different ways, and all of them worked as long as there was enough love to go around. The medical crisis that had brought their relationship into the open had also provided ongoing opportunities for Sister Marianne to be genuinely useful to Sarah's care. The detailed family medical history she'd maintained had proven invaluable for Sarah's pediatrician, and her continued documentation of health patterns observed in both sides of Sarah's biological family had become a resource that might benefit Sarah throughout her life. More importantly, perhaps, Sister Marianne's spiritual guidance had become increasingly meaningful to Sarah as she grew in her own faith understanding. The child's natural curiosity about God, prayer, and service to others found rich soil in conversations with someone who devoted her life to these questions. Sarah had begun joining Sister Marianne for morning prayers on Saturdays, sitting quietly in the chapel with a focus that impressed even the most experienced sisters. "I like talking to God with you," Sarah had explained when Sister Marianne asked about her interest in formal prayer time. "It feels different than when I pray by myself, like God can hear me better when we're praying together." These moments of shared spirituality had become some of Sister Marianne's most treasured experiences. Watching her daughter develop her own relationship with God, being able to guide and support that growth, felt like a fulfillment of prayers she'd been offering for 30 years. The yellow blanket with its pattern of interlocking hearts had become a permanent fixture of Sarah's bedtime routine. Linda had sent Sister Marianne photos of Sarah reading under the blanket, doing homework wrapped in its warmth, carrying it to the couch when she wasn't feeling well. "She calls it her love blanket," Linda had reported. "She says it reminds her that she has love coming from all different directions." As Sister Marianne sat in her cell on this quiet evening, looking at the photograph that captured their unconventional but deeply loving family, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The choice she'd made at 19 to give Sarah life and then give her the best possible chance at happiness had led to outcomes she never could have imagined. Her sacrifice had not only provided Sarah with wonderful parents and a secure childhood, but had ultimately created space for a relationship between them that honored both her religious calling and her maternal love. Sarah was thriving in every measurable way. Academically, socially, spiritually, emotionally, she was secure in her identity as a beloved daughter of the Thompson family, while also embracing her connection to Sister Marianne and the broader community of faith that had shaped her birth mother's life. She was curious about the world, kind to others, confident in her own worth, and blessed with the kind of open heart that could hold multiple forms of love without conflict. The wounds that Sister Marianne had carried for 30 years had not just healed. They had been transformed into sources of strength, wisdom, and deeper compassion. Her understanding of God's capacity for redemption, her ability to counsel other women facing impossible choices, her appreciation for the many ways families could be formed through love rather than biology. All of these gifts had grown from the soil of her early sacrifice. As she prepared for evening prayers, Sister Marianne whispered the same words of gratitude she'd been offering every night for the past 6 months. "Thank you for bringing us together. Thank you for making something beautiful from something that felt broken. Thank you for showing me that love always finds a way." In the distance, the convent bell began its familiar call to prayer, and Sister Marianne rose to join her community for their final worship of the day. Tomorrow, Sarah would come for her Saturday visit, bringing her endless questions, her infectious laughter, and her remarkable capacity for finding joy in simple things like watching seeds sprout in carefully tended soil. The future stretched ahead with uncertainty, as all futures do, but Sister Marianne faced it now with a peace she'd never expected to find. Her daughter was safe, loved, and growing into exactly the person she'd prayed she would become. Their relationship was built on a foundation solid enough to weather whatever challenges might come, rooted in love that had proven stronger than time, distance, and the complications of human arrangements. Some wounds, Sister Marianne had learned, were meant not just to heal, but to become doorways to grace larger than anything that had caused the original pain. In giving away her daughter, she had somehow found her way to a love more generous and sustainable than anything she could have imagined at 19. In losing Sarah, she had ultimately found not just her daughter, but a deeper understanding of how God's love worked in the world, multiplying rather than dividing, creating abundance from sacrifice, weaving connections that honored every thread in the complex tapestry of human caring.